Well, tonight, what I thought I would do, I found on the internet a story about Pippi Longstocking. In fact, I found lots and lots and lots of stories on the internet about Pippi Longstocking. So today, I thought I would read you the first story. The title is Pippi Moves into Villa Villecula. Interesting. Once upon a time, way out at the end of a tiny little town was an old, overgrown garden, and in the garden was an old house. And in the house lived Pippi Longstocking. She was 9 years old, and she lived there all alone. She had no mother and no father, and that was, of course, very nice, because there was no one to tell her what to do or to go to bed, just when she was having the most fun, and no one who could make her take any medicine or vitamins or cod liver oil when she much preferred candy. Once upon a time, Pippi had had a father of whom she was extremely fond. She really loved her father, and naturally she had had a mother too. But that was so long ago, Pippi didn't remember her at all. Her mother had died when Pippi was just a tiny baby and lay in a cradle and howled so that nobody could go anywhere near her. Howled means cried a lot. Pippi was sure that her mother was now up in heaven, watching her little girl through the peephole in the sky, and Pippi often waved up at her in the clouds and shouted, "Don't you worry about me, Mom. I'll always come out on top." Pippi had not forgotten about her father. He was a sea captain who sailed on the great ocean, and Pippi had sailed with him in a ship until one day her father was blown overboard in a storm and disappeared. But Pippi was absolutely certain that he would come back. She would never believe that he had drowned. She was sure he had floated until he landed on an island, and she thought he had become the king of all the people on that island and went around with a golden crown on his head all day long. "My papa is the cannibal king. It certainly isn't every child who can say who has such a stylish papa," Pippi used to say with satisfaction. "And as soon as my papa has built himself a boat, he will come and get me, and I'll be a cannibal princess. Hi-ho! Won't that be exciting?" Her father had bought the old house in the garden many years ago. He thought he would live there with Pippi when he grew old and couldn't sail the seas any longer. And then this annoying thing had to happen, that he was blown into the ocean, into the wild sea, and while Pippi was waiting for him to come back, she went straight home to Villa Villecula. That was the name of the house. It stood there, ready and waiting for her. One lovely summer evening, she had to say goodbye to all the sailors on her father's boat. They were all fond of Pippi, and she was fond of them. "So long, boys," she said, and kissed each of them on the forehead. "Don't you worry about me. I'll always come out on top," she said. 2 things she took with her from the ship: a little monkey whose name was Mr. Nilsson. He was a present from her father, and a big suitcase full of gold pieces and treasure. The sailors stood up on the deck and watched as long as they could see her. She walked straight ahead without looking back at all, with Mr. Nilsson on her shoulder and the suitcase in her hand. "A remarkable child," said one of the sailors as Pippi disappeared into the distance. And he was right. Pippi was indeed a very special, remarkable child. The most remarkable thing about her was that she was so strong. She was so very strong that in the whole wide world there was not a single police officer as strong as she. Why, she could lift a whole horse if she wanted to. And she wanted to. She had a horse of her own that she had bought with one of her many gold pieces the day she came home to Villa Villaculla. She had always longed and wanted a horse, and now here he was, living outside a house, on the porch. When Pippi wanted to drink her afternoon coffee, there she simply lifted him down into the garden. Wow. Beside Villa Villaculla was another garden and another house. In that house lived a father and a mother and 2 charming children, a boy and a girl, and the boy's name was Tommy, and the girl's name was Annika. They were good, well brought up, and obedient children. Tommy would never think of biting his nails, and he always did exactly what his mother told him. Annika never fussed, and when she didn't get her own way, and she was always looking very pretty in her little well-cotton dresses. She took the greatest care not to get that dirty. Tommy and Annika played very nicely with each other in the other garden, but they often wished for a playmate. They always wanted somebody else to play with sometimes. While Pippi was still sailing on the ocean with her father, they often used to hang over the fence and say to each other, "Isn't it silly that nobody ever moves into that house? Somebody ought to live there. Somebody with children." On that lovely summer evening, when Pippi, for the first time, stepped over the threshold of Villa Villaculla, Tommy and Annika were not at home. They had gone to visit their grandmother for a week, and so they had no idea that anybody had moved into the house next door. On the first day after they came home again, they stood by the gate looking out onto the street. And even then they didn't know that there actually was a playmate so near. Just as they were standing there, considering what they should do, and wondering whether anything exciting was likely to happen, or whether it was going to be one of those dull, boring days when they couldn't think of anything to do and play. Just then, the gate of Villa Villaculla opened, and a little girl stepped out. She was the most remarkable girl Tommy and Annika had ever seen. She was Miss Pippi Longstocking, out for the morning promenade. This is the way she looked. Her hair, the colour of a carrot, was braided in 2 tight braids that stuck straight out. Her nose was the shape of a very small potato, and it was dotted all over with freckles. It must be admitted that the mouth under this nose was very wide, with strong white teeth. Her dress was rather unusual. Pippi herself had made it. She had meant it to be blue, but there wasn't quite enough blue cloth, so Pippi had sewed little red pieces into it, here and there. On her long, thin legs she wore a pair of long stockings, one brown and the other black, and she had on one pair of black shoes that were exactly twice as long as her feet. These shoes her father had bought her in South America, so that Pippi would have something to grow into, and she never wanted to wear any others. But the thing that made Tommy and Annika open their eyes the widest of all was a monkey sitting on the strange girl's shoulder. It was a little monkey dressed in blue pants, yellow jacket, and a white straw hat. Pippi walked along the street with one foot on the sidewalk and the other in the gutter on the street. Tommy and Annika watched her as long as they could see her. In a little while she came back, and now she was walking backwards. This was because she didn't want to turn around to get home. When she reached Tommy's and Annika's gate, she stopped. The children looked at each other in silence. At last, Tommy spoke. Why do you walk backwards?" "Huh? Why did I walk backwards?" Pippi said. "Isn't this a free country? Can't a person walk any way she wants to? For that matter, let me tell you that in Egypt everybody walks that way. Nobody thinks it's the least a bit strange." "How do you know?" asked Tommy. "You've never been to Egypt, have you?" "I've never been to Egypt." "Indeed I have. That's one thing you can be sure of. I've been all over the world, said Pippi, and I've seen many things stranger than people walking backwards. I wonder what you would have said if you had come along walking on my hands the way they do in the farthest reaches of India. Now you must be lying, said Tommy. Pippi thought for a moment. You're right, she said suddenly. I am lying. It's wicked to lie, said Annika, who had at last gathered up enough courage to speak. Yes, it is very wicked to lie, said Pippi, even more sadly. But I forget it now. But I forget it now and then. And how can you expect a little child whose mother is an angel and whose father is a king of a cannibal island and who herself has sailed on the ocean all her life, how can you expect her to tell the truth anyway? And for that matter, she continued, her whole freckled face lighting up, let me tell you that in the Congo, in Africa, there is not a single person who tells the truth. They lie all day long. Begin at 7 a.m. and keep it on till sundown. So if I should happen to lie now, and then, sometimes, you must try and excuse me, and to remember that it's only because I stayed in the Congo a little bit too long. We can be friends anyway, can't we? Oh, sure, said Tommy, and realized suddenly that this was not going to be one of those dull, boring days. By the way, why couldn't you come and have breakfast with us? Asked Pippi. Why not? Said Tommy. Come on, let's go. Oh, yes, let's, said Annika. But first, I must introduce you to Mr. Nielsen, said Pippi, and the little monkey took off his cap and bowed politely. Then they all went in through Villa Villacula, tumble-down garden gates, along the gravel path, bordered with old moss-covered trees. Really good climbing trees they seemed to be up there. Up to the house onto the porch. There stood the horse munching oats out of a soup bowl. Why do you have a horse on the porch? Asked Tommy. All horses, he knew, lived in stables or in the field. Well, said Pippi, he'd be in the way in the kitchen, and he doesn't like the parlour or the living room. Tommy and Annika patted the horse and they went into the house. It had a kitchen, a living room, a bedroom, but it certainly looked as if Pippi had forgotten to do her Friday cleaning that week, and Tommy and Annika looked around cautiously, just in case the king of the cannibal island might be sitting in a corner somewhere. They had never seen a cannibal king in all their lives, but there was no father to be seen, nor any mother either. Now, a cannibal is a person who eats people. Oh my gosh. Annika said anxiously, Do you live here alone? Of course not, said Pippa. Mr. Nielsen and the horse live here too. Yes, but I mean, don't you have a mother and a father? No, not the least little tiny bit of one, said Pippi happily. But who tells you when to go to bed at night and things like that? Asked Annika. I tell myself, said Pippi. First I tell myself in a nice friendly way, and then if I don't mind, I tell myself it again in a more sharply. And if I still don't mind, then I'm in for a spanking. See? Tommy and Annika didn't see at all, but they thought maybe it was a good way. Meanwhile, they had come into the kitchen, and Pippi cried, Now we're going to make a pancake. Now there's going to be a pancake. Now we're going to fry a pancake. Then she took 3 eggs and threw them in the air. One fell down on her head and broke so that the yolk ran into her eyes, but the other she caught skillfully in a bowl, where they smashed into pieces. Oh, I always did hear that egg yolk was good for the hair, said Pippi, wiping her eyes. You wait and see. Mine will soon grow so fast it will crackle. As a matter of fact, in Brazil, all the people go about with eggs in their hair, and there are no bald people in Brazil. Only once was there a man who was so foolish that he ate all his eggs instead of rubbing them in his hair, and he became completely bald with no hair. And when he showed himself on the street, there was such a riot that the police were called out. While she was speaking, Pippi had neatly picked the eggshells out of the balls with her fingers. Now she took a bath brush that hung on the wall and began to beat the pancakes batter so hard that it splashed all over the walls. At last she poured what was left into the frying pan and stood it on the stove. When the pancake was brown on one side, she tossed it halfway up into the ceiling so that it turned right around in the air, and then she caught it on the frying pan again. And when it was ready, she threw it straight across the kitchen onto a plate that stood on the table. "Eat!" she cried. "Eat before it's cold!" And Tommy and Annika ate and thought it was a very good pancake. Afterwards, Pippi invited them to come to the living room. There was only one piece of furniture there. It was a huge chest with many tiny drawers. Pippi opened the drawers and showed Tommy and Annika all the treasures she kept there. There were wonderful birds' eggs, strange shells and stones, pretty little boxes, lovely silver mirrors, pearl necklaces, and many other things that Pippi and her father had bought on their journeys around the world. Pippi gave each of her new playmates a little gift to remember her by. Tommy got a dagger with a shimmering mother-of-pearl diamond handle, and Annika got a little box decorated with pink shells. In the box there was a ring with a green stone. "Suppose you go home now," said Pippi, "so that you can come back tomorrow, because if you don't go home you can't come back, and that would be a shame." Tommy and Annika agreed that it would indeed be a shame, so they went home, past the horse, who had now eaten up all the oats, out through the gate of Villa Villaculla. Mr. Nielsen waved his hat as they walked by. "Bye," said Pippi. "See you tomorrow," said Annika and Tommy. The end.